When we try to imagine a wartime submarine, what comes to mind first are hunting dramas, inventions for stealth, and black and white frames from propaganda films. The smell of burned fuel and the acrid sulfur reek of batteries became an everyday backdrop for the crews. But much less is said about a small yet fundamental question. What did these people actually eat? And how did it affect their survival? In this video, you'll learn why food decided the question of a crew's morale just as torpedoes decided the question of a successful hit. How different naval powers coped with limited space, which rituals and improvisations were born in the crew's stomachs, and how ordinary food can open a window into the soul of an era. Life on a submarine can be compared to staying inside a metal coffin that rocks in the dark. When U-boats were moored in German docks, crews said goodbye to light and fresh air for weeks ahead. Inside, they lived, slept, and ate in just a few dozen square meters. The air was always humid. It was enough to touch a wall to feel the condensation mixed with salt. Air filtering systems were primitive. The smells of fuel, sweat, and food permeated the uniforms. Sailors on American submarines joked they could tell a colleague's navy by the scent of his galley on his jacket. Germans smelled of sauerkraut and onions, Italians of garlic, and Americans of fried steak. This mix of aromas became part of crew identity. Besides smell, customs shaped food as well. Every naval power brought its own culinary traditions aboard. While the Germans preached the ideal of Eintopf, a single hearty one-pot meal, the Americans couldn't do without a multi-course dinner. The British kept the tradition of 5 o'clock tea even at depth, and the Japanese regarded rice as sacred. Every routine, every meal had a mission to feed and to remind of home at the same time. And it is precisely this collision of traditions in a few square meters that, in the highest sense, humanizes war. Submarines were also technological experiments. Since the First World War, they had changed significantly. Electric batteries allowed longer submergence. Hydrodynamic hulls reduced drag. Sonar opened new tactical possibilities. Behind all this hid a simple truth. A hungry mechanic at the diesel engine won't do the same job as a fed and rested one. Strategists understood this. Even Erich Raeder, Gross Admiral of the German fleet, emphasized that with a hopeless galley, the crew would not be in shape. U.S. Admiral Chester Nimitz asserted that the most important weapon of a submarine is high morale and a good galley. The main question then is, how could that ideal be realized inside an iron tube with falling oxygen levels? A World War II submarine was a machine in the literal sense, a small metal tube full of mechanisms, weapons, and people that crawled for weeks or months deep beneath the surface. Cramped space, lack of fresh air, mold, and corrosion ate the steel just as salt and sweat ate the sailor's skin. There wasn't a single window offering a view. Orientation in time depended on periscope watches and on the sound of the galley timer announcing meals. Food was one of the few bright moments that reminded crews of the world above. In a moment, we'll reveal the great care, despite the war, that naval staffs devoted to underwater menus, and what the journey into unknown tastes brought. Chapter 1 takes us into the heart of the submarine, where food was not only about satiety, but also about strategy. In the tight quarters of German U-boats, Italian sommergibili, and American boats, every centimeter of space was used deliberately. There was no separate storeroom for provisions. Canned goods, vegetables, sacks of flour, and dozens of kilograms of potatoes were hung from hooks under the ceiling, slung along bulkheads, or laid on the deck and among machinery. Sailors improvised improvements. On a veterans' forum of German U-boats, one reads that stores filled not only the galley, but the toilets as well. Fresh potatoes were piled into the heads, and in the first days at sea, the toilet fixtures were used as a pantry. At the beginning of a patrol, sausages were hung to cure by the rudder. Nets with fruit and bundles of fresh vegetables hung from the overheads, while tins of meat and soup lined the passageways. To better balance the hull, Provisions were stowed by weight and rate of consumption. Heavy cans down near the keel, light hardtack and spices up high. Consumption was logged so the crew could trim the load and prevent a list. The image of food scattered among torpedoes and electrical partitions may seem absurd, but it was necessary. Under depth charge attack, the crew had to douse lights, quiet machinery, and wait in fear to see whether the hull would hold. During those long hours of silence, sailors prayed and thought of family. Memories often turned to food. A former machinist from U-96 recalls that when he heard the whine of depth charges, he mentally recited his mother's strudel recipe. Apple juice, cinnamon, raisins, dough. If I survive, I'll bake it. This mental ritual calmed and gave hope. Food became a psychological anchor. In a damp, ever-changing environment, sailors also had to think how to protect the stores. If fresh produce wasn't used quickly, it molded. Many crews kept fresh goods in forward compartments, cooler thanks to immersion. German U-boat supply lists included not only staples but also storage gear, hooks, nets, wicker baskets, and special cushions to keep eggs from cracking in turbulence. American submarines used wooden frames fitted with jars of pickled vegetables. British crews dried meat over the engines. The Japanese packed food in bamboo boxes that absorbed moisture. Practically, menus were planned so that fresh foods were eaten first. In the first week, there were salads, fresh fruit, and meat. After 10 days, the fresh taste disappeared. Bread molded, potatoes sprouted, meat became canned. They turned to bean soups, dried fruit, and bacon. When a bowl of beans with sausage replaced roast chicken, it signaled the patrol's midpoint. Jokes circulated. When the smell changes in the compartment, you know we're getting close to home. In this video, you'll also learn about another phenomenon, the smell of canned goods. Sailors complained that when a tin was opened, it stank of metal and oil. Some tried to get rid of it by rinsing the tins and rubbing them with vinegar first. American cans often developed oily films, while German ones were heavy on fat and salt. Canned food was salvation, but also a digestive challenge. In tight quarters, you couldn't heat it too quickly, or you risked an explosion. Special holders were used for warming, and open flames were prohibited. Many crews preferred canned food cold, masking the aftertaste with mustard and bread. This improvised pantry, however, was quickly depleted. Heat, humidity, and vibration meant that fresh vegetables and meat spoiled within the first 2 weeks. At the start of a patrol, the crew enjoyed the aroma of frying meat and the smell of fresh bakery bread. But as CO2 levels rose and supplies faded, tables filled with cans and dried rations. Submariners learned quickly that a rendezvous with milk cows, supply submarines, was as rare as popping into a self-service store. A meeting meant a few crates of fresh eggs, some fruit, and above all, gasoline and diesel fuel. According to an interrogation protocol for U-128 from 1943, a supply submarine passed over only a small amount of food and even brought a doctor who treated men for heat rash skin diseases. Even such small reinforcements were welcome. When a crew finally surfaced or was captured, the contrast in diet was shocking. From a German POW's diary, we learned that after capture aboard a Canadian destroyer, the crew enjoyed cigarettes, hot baths, and excellent food, exactly the opposite of what they had endured in their iron cylinder. These contrasts show how food became a measure of humanity, and at the same time, that even in total war, humanity stayed alive through the offer of a piece of bread or a mug of coffee. The Third Reich's U-boat war became legendary. German captains like Prien, Kretschmer, or Lemp gained hero status, and their crews were pushed to the edge. Survival demanded not only resolve, but honest stores. According to plans for Type Wind-C boats, which sailed 12-week patrols, the hold took approximately 4,400 kilos of fresh meat, 3,600 kilos of smoked meats, 750 kilos of canned meat, then fish, 9,600 kilos of potatoes, 4,500 loaves of bread, 2,400 kilos of rice, 3,600 eggs, 700 kilos of fruit, 800 kilos of vegetables, and about 150 kilos of butter. Added to this were barrels and boxes of staples: cheese, milk, coffee, sugar, salt, chocolate, flour, and other ingredients. Food was planned to be energy-dense and tasty at the same time, sustaining the crew in stress situations like emergency surfacing or convoy attack. In practice, German submarine fare formed a rhythm that divided the watches. Breakfast began with coffee, bread with butter, honey, eggs, or meat paste, sometimes white or rye bread with bacon. Lunch was soup, often beef broth or potato plus potatoes and vegetables. Then came roast or stewed meat with vegetables and a piece of fruit. Supper was lighter: sausages, smoked meats or canned fish, cheese, bread, and coffee or tea. These three main meals could be supplemented by seagoing delicacies, such as brotaufstrich, various spreads, mostly melted cheeses and butter. Some boats had talented cooks who could surprise the crew. Diaries from U-510 record a full menu for the 11th week of a patrol in August 1943. On Sunday, the crew breakfasted on chocolate, honey, hardtack, and butter. Lunch brought tomato soup, mushrooms, potatoes, roast veal, and fruit. Supper was sausage, camembert, bread, butter, and tea. Monday brought milk soup and marmalade, lunch of red cabbage with pork and potatoes, and supper of liver pâté, lard, bread, and sauerkraut. Tuesday offered bread, butter, jam, and coffee for breakfast, rice with chicken and pudding for lunch, pasta with goulash for supper. Gradually, the menu simplified. The last days featured mostly canned vegetables, pea or bean stew, and biscuits with smoked meats. This colorful weekly plan shows the U-boat's attempt to preserve variety until stocks ran out. On German submarines, one of the most important crew members was the cook. He did not stand regular watch, but his work was endless. 2 meals a day on weekdays, up to 5 on Sundays, baking, desserts, and on top of that, birthdays or anniversaries. On holidays, the mess turned into a beer hall. The crew received a small ration of beer or schnapps, and the cook baked a special cake. The ability to celebrate in a space where a diesel engine droned non-stop was a small miracle. A talented cook provided enormous psychological support. In a moment, we'll show how food quality could mean the difference between a determined crew and a depressed one. Many sailors' memoirs include the words, "Our cook and our bread, symbols of home." When meals failed, spoiled flour or damp coal ruining bakes, morale fell as fast as battery levels. As the war dragged on, blockade and shortages on the German side affected submarine diets. Sources indicate crews often bartered with fishermen for fresh fish. Later, soy bratling. Mixes filled sausages instead of meat. Cans had to be inspected carefully. Some tins bulged under pressure or had mislabeled contents. Improper storage risked food poisoning and outbreaks. Crews still knew how to help themselves. Small treats like chocolate and candies became currency to trade with harbor boatmen or local fishermen for fresh fruit. In the war's last years, poor substitutes multiplied. A 1944 cook's diary notes that meat was replaced by a pink soy mass. The taste was disgusting, but the corporal ordered no complaints. Crews learned to enrich such dishes with spices. Captains permitted mustard, pepper, and caraway. Yeast extract gained popularity. The British used it on bread, and a German equivalent rich in vitamin B appeared. When a crew sailed from Kiel, it received several buckets of marmalade, a dark spread for hardtack that provided energy. We must not forget alcohol. German command officially banned spirits on patrol, but reality differed. Crews received a cognac or rum ration on special occasions. Captains sometimes kept a bottle of schnapps in their cabin. Alcohol served as an anesthetic and a way to blunt fear. Similarly, Americans had strict bans, but there is testimony that after successful torpedo attacks, a captain allowed a small dose of whiskey. Italians and French carried small casks of wine. The Japanese, sake. These rituals, however, were exceptions rather than rule. Improvisation extended to cooking itself. Cooks, often drafted from restaurants, had to work with gasoline burners and electric hot plates. American submarines used electric ovens that often failed during sharp maneuvers. German boats had a small solid fuel stove. Italy experimented with a 3-chamber stove where broth simmered, pasta fried, and bread baked side by side. Cooks had to keep food from spilling during sudden dives. They devised special lids with hooks and pneumatic latches. Pressure cookers were common, shortening cook times and saving fuel, vital when running deep. Over the course of patrols, resupply from milk cows, type Sikiev and Fort Thrift supply submarines, became more frequent. Interrogations show that at rendezvous crews were handed only small amounts of provisions because fuel came first. Still, those few crates of tropical fruit or eggs could lift spirits. Some crews were even visited by a doctor to treat heat rash or mold-related skin issues. Now let's cross to the other side of the ocean, into the sea lanes of the Pacific and Atlantic, where American submarines hunted Japanese and German shipping. In the interwar period, U.S. naval logistics invested in modernizing shipboard galleys, introducing so-called cafeteria messing, self-service, which, unlike the old line-on-deck method, offered better hygiene and smoother crew service. Ships were equipped with freezers, refrigerators, heavy fryers, and even ice cream machines. A typical menu on U.S. warships looked like this. Breakfast offered fruit, cereal, toast, pancakes or eggs with bacon, plus milk and coffee. Dinner, the main daily meal, brought roast lamb with mint sauce, baked potatoes, buttered carrots, salad, ice cream, bread, and coffee. The third meal, supper, could consist of cream of chicken soup, baked lunch and meat casserole, sliced cheese, salad, chocolate cake, and tea. This luxury was the pinnacle of standards that U.S. crews often experienced even on submarines. One of the most memorable beverages aboard American submarines was coffee. According to an article on naval provisions, coffee consumption was measured in tons. A single carrier could consume 1/4 ton of coffee beans in one day of flight operations. Submariners drank coffee almost constantly. In U.S. slang, it was Joe, and it became an ally on night watches. A ritual was born. A black mug of hot brew was always available and, alongside water and tea, belonged to the most important liquids. Coffee also served as a marker of social status. On some U.S. submarines, there was an unwritten coffee caste system. Officers received better blends. Enlisted men drank cheaper mixes. When the crew learned of an especially fine batch, clandestine trades sprang up. Cigarettes or canned goods swapped for a cup of stronger Joe. One veteran recalls that at watch change in a narrow passageway, 3 generations of the crew met. The senior electrician handed the second watch a thermos and said, "This coffee will save your life, son." In this video, you'll learn how coffee drinking became a ritual for bonding and setting the day's rhythm. When coffee ran low, crews sought alternatives. Some mixed in malt to bulk it out. Others went to extremes, drinking hot salted water, which led to dehydration. Japanese submarines chiefly drank green, roasted rice water, genmaicha style, with a stimulating effect. Sometimes matcha was added. The British preferred tea, but when it ran out, resorted to what they considered the American luxury of coffee. Italians and French stuck to classic espresso brewed in small devices tapped off the steam lines. These contrasts show how an ordinary drink became a cultural symbol. Americans were famed for love of desserts and ice cream. Ocean-going capital ships carried tens of thousands of liters of ice cream on each cruise. Destroyers and submarines couldn't afford such luxury. One account describes battleships carrying up to 60,000 quarts, over 56,000 liters, of ice cream for their crews. Smaller vessels improvised. Some captains used ice cream as ransom for rescued pilots, promised a scoop upon safe return if they joined the sub's crew temporarily. The National Dairy Council, moreover, promoted ice cream as a fighting food, rich in vitamins and minerals, showing how provisioning intertwined with propaganda. Ice cream wasn't the only dessert. American submarines had a small oven for baking, so apple pies, brownies, and cookies were frequent. The baker had an edge. His aromas drew the crew and ensured his popularity. In one cook's memoir, we read that the greatest joy came from a lemon meringue pie he made for Christmas. The crew even quarreled over it. Italians had their biscotti and panettone. The French, crème flan. Germans, Linzer torte and stollen. The British loved raisin suet puddings. These sweets symbolized home and helped crews endure hard days. A concrete example of an American submarine kitchen is the museum boat USS Pampanito in San Francisco. The ship's guide explains that cooks and bakers there worked practically 24 hours a day. The crew was divided into 3 watches. Each ate at a different time so the cramped mess could serve all. Stores were stowed under benches. Freezers and chill boxes sat beneath the main deck. Before sailing, every free nook was packed with food. Cans in the torpedo rooms, vegetables in bags, fruit hanging in nets. Coffee flowed like a torrent. The coffee pot was never turned off. The mess space also served as a commons. The crew played chess, read, and even exercised there. This combination of food and leisure reminds us how meals bound the crew together. Despite relative abundance, U.S. fleets still faced logistical limits. In Pacific campaigns, carriers and submarines had priority. Destroyers and smaller ships often subsisted on canned beans and corned beef. Even luxurious ice cream machines were sometimes shut down to save fuel and water. Still, compared to German or Japanese boats, American submarines were far better supplied. On July 4, 1945, the crew of battleship USS Iowa celebrated Independence Day with a menu of turkey with cranberry sauce, mashed potatoes, peas, pastries, cakes, candies, ice cream, and lemonade. Submarines couldn't reproduce that feast, but special holiday rations did appear. The cook would prepare trout or steak if stocks allowed. Now to royal waters, where British Commonwealth submarines fought in the Atlantic, Mediterranean, and Pacific. The British approach to submarines differed. Boats were smaller and often derived from torpedo craft. As one blogger notes, many small boats lacked even space for a full cook, and storerooms were limited. Crews therefore relied on simple recipes: bacon, canned bread, tinned meats, and above all, tea. The British maintained the tradition of black tea with milk and sugar even underwater. The teapot circulated between watches. Mugs were passed down. The most remarkable episode from British submarines is the story of the Soviet gift to HMS Triumph, a live reindeer named Pollyanna. According to the article, a Soviet admiral gave the crew a reindeer in thanks for Arctic convoy help. The animal traveled from Murmansk to the UK and lived for 6 weeks in the cramped forward spaces of the sub. Pollyanna ate reindeer moss, condensed milk, and various scraps, even gnawing on charts and dirty uniforms. The crew had to improvise and adapt not only their feeding, but their free space. When the submarine returned home, the reindeer became a celebrity and survived the war in a zoo. British crews suffered chronic shortages of fresh supplies due to the brutal Battle of the Atlantic. Some larger T or O-class subs could meet supply ships, but most missions relied on what was loaded at port. Winter storms and the constant threat of German U-boats further complicated convoys. Yet crews kept stoic humor. Traditional fish and chips appeared only rarely, but dried cod and canned peas stood in for fish and potatoes. As the war progressed, more American canned goods reached British subs, including the famous Spam, a ham and pork loaf. A British joke said you could rely on Spam more than on Allied command. So deeply did this can lodge in generational memory. For British sailors, the tot, the daily rum ration, was important. The Royal Navy abolished it only in 1970, but during W2 rum was part of life aboard, and submariners welcomed the measured midday dram. Rum was mixed with water as grog. Lemon juice was sometimes added to replenish vitamin C. According to a cook from HMS Sturdy, this small rite brought warmth to the stomach and courage to the heart, when the machinery roared and the periscope ducked the waves. As for food itself, British crews opted for simplicity: daily beans on toast, porridge, and tinned roast beef. When fresh fish could be had, kedgeree, a mix of rice, smoked fish, eggs, and curry, was prepared. British sailors thus came to know Indian spices that stayed with them after the war. Warm raisin treacle puddings were favorites the cooks tried to serve at least once a week. When sugar ran short, beet syrups or honey were used. Despite stoicism, humor thrived. When gravy was once spilled onto a main switch, the crew joked that gravy was the new fuel. They said a British cook could make tasty soup from nothing, and even sauce could lift the low mood creeping down the narrow corridors. In a moment, we'll show that this humor, combined with warm tea and biscuits, was to the British what coffee was to the Americans. The Commonwealth meant that people from around the world served aboard: Indians, Canadians, Australians, New Zealanders, South Africans. Each brought dietary habits. Indian cooks, so-called Lascars, prepared curries, dal, lentils, and chapati. Canadians loved pea-meal bacon, cornmeal-cured pork. Australians carried Vegemite, a dark yeast spread. New Zealanders added kiwi and lamb to the menu. These tastes mixed in the pot with mashed potatoes and Old English bread to create an international menu that helped define modern British cuisine. Australian and Canadian units also operated submarines or joined Allied Lend-Lease programs. Canadians accustomed to cold valued hot tea and fruit pemmican, a condensed mix of dried meat and fat used by indigenous peoples. Australians brought Vegemite, rich in vitamin B. These differences show that food carried identity and culture even aboard metal hulls. Italy entered the war with a large submarine force operating in the Mediterranean and Atlantic. Italians were known for exacting food standards. Their culture emphasized freshness, pasta, and olive oil. The Italian Navy sought to ensure quality, using civilian chefs to cook 5-course menus, yet limited submarine space collided with that ideal. Boats carried stores of pasta, olive oil, dried tomatoes, parmesan, dried mushrooms, and of course salami and wine. Thanks to the Mediterranean climate and shorter distances between ports, they could allow more fresh produce, which in warmer seas quickly spoiled and then gave way to cans and hardtack. Italians aimed for more than endless spaghetti. Archives show crews received also chickpeas, lentils, beans, anchovies, tuna, dried figs, and nuts. On board they cooked pasta e fagioli, minestrone, and risotto allo zafferano. Pasta was boiled in seawater to conserve fresh water. Wine was rationed and usually served only on special days, St. Mark's Day, or upon return to home port. In hard days, wine became disinfectant and psychological balm. Italian cuisine also became propaganda. Mussolini declared that Italian pasta proved the superiority of Italian culture. Pride in food motivated crews. Cooks competed over the best ragu. Families were asked to send dried herbs. Many sailors came from farming regions and knew how to keep garlic and onions longer. Every papery onion skin was worth its weight in gold. It could season sauces and soften the taste of canned goods. A lesser-known aspect of Italian subs was their role transporting food to North Africa. Beyond the cited Venero, other boats delivered cheese, ham, and sardines to besieged Tobruk. These missions were extremely risky. Submarines had to slip past British patrol aircraft and minefields. One captain said he felt like a floating bakery because his boat carried more flour than torpedoes. Not all men were thrilled at risking their lives for groceries, yet Italian command treated these missions as strategic. Supplying the front was as important as attacking Allied convoys. Italian crews also struggled with fresh water shortages. Many boats had distillers turning seawater into fresh, which, however, tasted like metallic oil. Wives sent packages with limoncello and grapefruit extracts to make refreshing drinks. Some crews grew small herbs aboard in tins. Food became a realm for regional identity. Sicilians cooked caponata. Venetians insisted on polenta. Italian subs sometimes served as supply boats for the army in Africa. For example, the submarine Veniero delivered to besieged Bardia in Libya in March 1941, 6 loads of ammunition and 38 tons of provisions. Another mission had to be aborted after sailing with 1,785 crates of stores due to enemy threats. These figures indicate Italians played not only offensive, but also logistical roles, bringing bread, flour, and dried meat to cut off garrisons. Italian dishes paired with red wine became legend. In practice, drinks were often absent because alcohol was banned or limited aboard. The Japanese submarine force, including the famed I-class boats, had grand ambitions. Some, like the giant I-400, even carried seaplanes intended to bomb the Panama Canal, unlike American or German boats. But Japanese submarines typically sacrificed crew comfort for armament and ammunition. Inside reigned incredible heat, humidity, and mold. Fresh water was scarce. Fresh food ran out quickly. Spaces were tight. The captain had to choose more torpedoes or more rice, and usually chose torpedoes. Despite that, Japanese cuisine stands out for variety. Crews tried to reproduce traditional dishes such as miso soup, tamagoyaki omelet, tsukemono pickles, and sukiyaki. Ingredients weren't always available. Improvisation was constant. Miso mixed with roasted soy flour to last longer. Soy sauce from concentrates. Fresh fish replaced by canned sardines. Rice, the sacred staple, was cooked once or twice a day in a large pot. When rice ran out, crews turned to sweet potato cakes and barley porridge. A key ritual was serving warm tea. Green tea was drunk before every watch, and brewing it was a ceremony. Water heated in a copper kettle, leaves infused, and the crew lined up to pour. That moment of silence and focus reinforced collective morale. Dessert had its place too. Simple rice porridge with black sesame and honey. American troops who met Japanese POWs were surprised that despite poverty, Japanese meals remained aesthetic. The culture of honor meant meals were eaten in silence. Discipline was strict. Slurping was banned. Conversation at table discouraged. The commander ate last. Even under depth charge attack, Japanese crews tried to maintain tea ritual and brief meditation, differing from Western crews who wolfed food on the run during alarms. By the war's end, conditions deteriorated sharply. Food shortages in Japan meant crews ate dried sweet potatoes, sugar beets, and anything that could be canned. Resupply grew difficult under U.S. blockade. Crews suffered hunger and disease. Cases of cannibalism occurred on some Japanese transports, though not confirmed on submarines. The Pacific victory thus played out on the supply field too. When we talk about W-2 submarines, we usually mention Germans, Americans, British, Italians, and Japanese. Yet other flotillas had their own gastronomic features. The Soviet Union operated extensive submarine forces in the Baltic, Black, and Northern Seas. Many Soviet sailors came from villages and were accustomed to humble fare. Their menu featured black bread, kasha, buckwheat or millet, dried fish, sauerkraut, lard, and hardtack. Borscht and shchi, cabbage soup, were common. The Soviet system set strict rations. Each sailor was supposed to receive a set number of calories per day, but meeting the plan depended on supply corridors. During the siege of Leningrad, Baltic crews sometimes starved. Soviet subs also ran supplies to besieged Sevastopol. Food meant life and death for civilians in Crimea. France, divided after 1940, had two submarine forces, Free French and Vichy. The French Navy prided itself on culinary traditions. Even under duress, cooks tried to prepare bouillabaisse, ratatouille, stewed vegetables, and baked baguettes. After capitulation, many French boats joined the British, blending French cuisine into British menus. The legendary Surcouf, largest pre-war submarine, served in Allied operations. Its cooks allegedly smuggled wine and cheese to lift spirits. When Surcouf vanished in February 1942, the crew with their wines disappeared too, fueling romantic speculation. The Dutch flotilla operating in Indonesia and the Indian Ocean combined European tradition with Asian influences. The Dutch learned to eat rijsttafel, a rice table with many side dishes from Indonesian cuisine. Their subs served rice, sauté, peanut sauce, but also Dutch cheeses, herring, and bread. This fusion became an exotic but beloved staple. Dutch cooks earned a reputation for resourcefulness, and their recipes survived in family cookbooks even after the flotilla was partly destroyed during the Japanese invasion. After the war, Dutch veterans gathered to remember service with a small rijsttafel kossen. Polish and Norwegian crews, who joined the Royal Navy after occupation, must also be mentioned. Polish boats like Orzeł gained fame for brave actions in the Baltic. Polish cuisine brought pierogi, cabbage rolls, and poppy seed cakes. Norwegians brought salmon, smoked herring, and sweet goat cheese brunost. These fruitful crossings of taste enriched Allied naval culture. As we can see, submarine food was neither uniform nor monotonous. It was a motley mosaic of cultures and improvisations. In this video, you'll learn how diverse menus helped forge alliances. When Poles shared pierogi with Britons, they became friends. Food functioned as a diplomatic tool even on the ocean floor. War's end brought dramatic changes. Many submariners ended up in POW camps. Germans captured by the Allies were interned in Canada, the USA, or Australia. Conversely, Americans and Britons fell into Japanese captivity. For all, food defined a new world. A German sailor rescued by a Canadian destroyer after his sub was sunk wrote in his diary that after nearly a month of hunger afloat, he received a bowl of goulash with mashed potatoes, salad, pastry, and coffee. It felt like a dream. These POWs were shocked by the abundance of food and cigarettes, and often felt ashamed that their families at home had nothing to eat. American and British sailors captured by the Japanese experienced the opposite extreme. Guards fed them rice, pickles, and miso, often in very small portions. Some died of malnutrition and disease. Japanese submarine crews captured by Americans underwent thorough interrogation, while being given sandwiches, coffee, and cigarettes as a form of psychological pressure, tying kindness to confession. One Japanese sailor later said he was stunned to receive 3 meals a day, including meat and desserts. In internment, food became currency. German POWs grew vegetables in camp gardens. Britons in Canadian camps brewed marmalade tea from carrots and sugar beet. Italians grew tomatoes and basil for authentic sauce. Americans made peanut butter from Red Cross parcels. These activities sustained cultural identity. Food memories survived in post-war stories. Veterans described how individual tastes defined their service. The flavor of ham on the first patrol. The bitterness of coffee at depth. The taste of rice with miso while awaiting bombardment. Witnesses also recalled the downsides: rancid cans, moldy potatoes, the disgusting smell of Bratling powder. These memories became part of literature and film. The popular 1981 film Das Boot realistically shows scenes where the cook fights damp and mold. In such works, food symbolizes both hope and horror. In this video, you'll learn how these stories were passed down. German veterans wrote cookbooks based on shipboard recipes. American veterans held reunions serving wartime ice cream and steak. British and Polish veterans in Britain founded submarine clubs where they shared tea and pastries. In Tokyo, Japanese veterans opened restaurants named Senkan, warship, serving dishes akin to those on submarines. Through food, trauma became shareable memory. Many submarine crews observed rituals of faith and tradition. German crews often sang Ich hatte einen Kameraden before meals as a pious rite for the fallen. American crews used toasts to absent friends at celebrations. The British said a short prayer before every meal, read by the chaplain or an officer. Italians crossed themselves and thanked Saint Anthony, patron of lost things, to find the target. Japanese chanted Buddhist sutras and bowed before eating. These rites united the crew and reinforced collective identity. Religious diversity was especially obvious in the U.S. fleet. Crews included Christians, Jews, Muslims, and atheists. Cooks had to respect kosher and halal rules. For example, Jewish sailors received fish and chicken instead of pork. Muslims abstained from alcohol. For holidays like Passover, special matzos were baked. This cultural respect fostered unit cohesion. One of the most curious customs was the frog toast on American submarines. After sinking a Japanese ship, the cook fried batter in the shape of a frog, and the crew ate it as a symbol of victory. On German U-boats, there was a Jägermeister toast, a small shot to honor luck before the hunt. Such rituals strengthened psychological resilience. The Japanese preferred rice as the staple, complemented with canned fish, seaweed, soy sauce, and pickled vegetables. Though rice stored well and was nutritious, its monotony weighed on crews. In memoirs from the I-400 airmen, one pilot notes that life on a submarine was the exact opposite of aviation. He couldn't tell day from night, and the crew ate only canned foods, even if enough of them. Japanese submarines sometimes tried keeping hamsters or growing vegetables aboard, but overcrowding and heat made it difficult. Some crews received mochi rice cakes and dried mochi paste with tea powder as dessert. Beyond culinary challenges, honor and discipline mattered. Japanese culture treated deprivation as proof of devotion. Complaints about food were unwelcome. Yet small celebrations occurred. Upon returning to home port, the crew might receive sake and sushi. As we've already noted, the cook's role was key in all submarine forces. On U-boats, it was common for the smucha, cook, to have only a few square meters and still feed dozens of men. His work was not only culinary performance but psychological service, bringing joy and a homey atmosphere. He coordinated with the executive officer, who decided when to serve festive meals, and with the engineers, whose work cycles set meal times. Cooks had to be craftsmen and organizers. When provisions arrived, they had to decide what to use at once and what to save for later days, to judge how fast foods would spoil, and whether the patrol would be extended by enemy activity. In this sense, cooks were almost logisticians. The German smucha had tables to calculate, by water temperature and patrol length, how many eggs per day would be consumed. The American steward kept allergy lists to avoid dangerous ingredients. The Royal Navy even had an official submarine cookery course on managing stores and safety when cooking under pressure. We should remember that cooks often came from varied ethnic and social backgrounds. On American submarines, cooks included African Americans, Filipinos, Chinese, and Hispanics, bringing new recipes. African American cooks made gumbo, cornbread, and fried chicken. Filipinos cooked pancit noodles and adobo stews. Spaniards added chiles and beans. This diversity reflected American society and enriched the menu. German U-boats, by contrast, remained homogeneous. Cooks were German, and dishes reflected regional cuisines. Bavarians made pretzels, Berliners, currywurst. Italians took pride in regional differences too, arguing whether pasta should be al dente or soft. Rituals touched not only meals but cleaning and duty. After every meal, dishes were washed in salt water because fresh water was scarce. The cook had to prevent wastage. The machinist monitored power use. Before diving, galley equipment had to be secured. Pots clipped to stoves, plates stacked in special racks. A simple mishap could send 50 portions of soup onto the deck and leave the crew hungry. Even such trifles hit morale. Under stress, the cook became a mediator. When conflict flared between mechanics and electricians, he might offer a chocolate bar and shift the mood. On German subs, Long patrols featured Kameradschaftsabende, nights of solidarity. The crew gathered forward, sang folk songs, the cook served simple snacks, and the captain spoke. Americans had movie nights with popcorn, Italians sera musicale with a mandolin. Food was always present as a mediator between harsh reality and joy. On American boats, duties were split among the chief steward, baker, and assistants. With a three-watch crew, the galley ran almost constantly. According to the Pampanito Guide, sailors could grab a sandwich, cookie, or coffee at any time. Bakers produced bread and pastries. The aroma of fresh rolls in a sealed metal cylinder was a source of happiness. All nations cherished holidays: Christmas, Thanksgiving, the captain's birthday, the launching anniversary. Then cooks broke out hidden stores: chocolate, dried fruit, rum, or vodka, and cooked hometown specialties. A German cook might bake plum cake, an American, turkey with cranberries, an Italian, pasta alla marinara, a Briton, mint pudding. Even a tiny ration bottle of cognac had great symbolism, bringing back civilian life and courage to face storms or depth charges. Submarine nutrition was always a compromise among energy needs, storability, and morale. In cramped, high-stress conditions, crews needed 3,000–4,000 kilocalories per day. German subs met this with high fat and protein: sausages, cheeses, bacon. Americans emphasized meat, milk, and sweet desserts, delivering high calories and carbohydrates. Japanese relied on rice and fish, supplemented with fermented soy foods. Calories weren't the only factor. Crews often lacked fiber, vitamins, and minerals. Scurvy, vitamin C deficiency, appeared even in the 20th century on some German and Japanese boats. The British countered with citrus juice and sauerkraut. Germans carried barrels of sauerkraut and apple vinegar as prophylaxis. The Japanese used pickled umeboshi plums and fermented soy. Americans took vitamin C and multivitamins and orange juice from concentrate. Hygiene was vital to prevent enteric infections. On a sub, keeping hands clean was hard. A small portion of raw carrot or apple could carry salmonella. Cooks had to sterilize cutting boards and knives in boiling water. When someone fell ill, pressure on the rest rose, especially on the doctor, if one was aboard. On German U-boats, doctors were only on larger types. On smaller boats, an experienced sailor filled the role. American subs often had surgeons who could perform basic procedures. The British and Italians had medics with nursing backgrounds. The Japanese relied on herbs and acupuncture. Lack of sleep, stuffiness, and fear caused psychosomatic problems: heartburn, stomach pain, constipation. Monotony worsened the psychological side. After weeks, even favorites became chores. Cooks tried to vary spices and formats, turning dough into dumplings, frying or drying them. Americans used leftovers: yesterday's steak cut into strips and cooked with rice to make a chop suey-style dish. Germans made Kartoffelpuffer, potato pancakes from leftover potatoes and flour. Britons fried bubble and squeak, a mix of potatoes, cabbage, and meat. This creativity beat boredom and kept crews ready. Psychology under pressure showed in tastes. Some lost appetite in danger. Others overate to calm down. Reports say some U-boat sailors secretly binged on sweets from stores and later felt guilty. On American boats, some chewed coffee beans for a quick jolt, then suffered insomnia. Post-war psychologists studying crews noted that prolonged submarine service could lead to eating pattern disorders. These insights shaped modern submarine provisioning. Diverse diets and well-lit eating spaces became standard. Vitamin deficiencies still threatened without fresh produce. Germans carried sauerkraut barrels, lemon juice, and vitamin C tablets. Americans provided orange juice and lemon syrup. Supplements were used. British crews received plasmin tablets and Horlicks. The Japanese relied on miso and pickled foods as B vitamin sources. Still, some crews couldn't avoid night blindness, gum inflammation, and skin problems. The mind played a big role. The monotony of meals bred depression. Days blurred. Food thus functioned as a clock. When the cook produced something unexpected, like a sweet dessert, morale rose. Experienced crews knew that the approaching end of patrol meant more canned meals, so even a small remnant of fresh fruit signaled surfacing soon. In a moment, we'll reveal how some crews handled stress. Americans played accordion and sang. Germans listened to radio broadcasts. Italians recited opera arias. Food was the base, but mental resilience came from crew culture. Food in submarine warfare was largely defined by logistics. German U-boats depended on supply subs, milk cows, that carried fuel plus crates of fresh produce, cigarettes, and medical supplies. In southern waters, they brought tropical fruits like bananas and pineapples. In the Atlantic, potatoes and onions. In the late war, these suppliers became prime Allied targets. Their loss forced shorter patrols with worse food. Logistics differed by theater. In the Atlantic, with the sharpest German blockade, convoys had to be pierced under air threat. In the Pacific, U.S. submarines relied on relatively safe bases in Hawaii, Australia, and later Okinawa, nodes where ships were repaired, refueled, and restocked. Supply ships carried thousands of crates of meat, vegetables, flour, sugar, and spices. Battleship Washington. Reportedly loaded, in one replenishment, 8,500 kilos of lemons, 1,400 kilos of cucumbers, 1,350 kilos of lettuce, 20,000 kilos of ham, and other products. Figures that show how logistics also supported smaller subs via trickle-down from capital ships. British logistics were tougher. Unlike the U.S., Britain lacked a single massive Pacific rear base. Their hubs were Gibraltar, Alexandria, Malta, and later Sri Lanka. Boats traversed long distances and depended on convoys. Italian and German aircraft constantly attacked them, so British subs often couldn't resupply at sea and had to survive on minimal rations until port. This spurred preservation advances. British chemists developed new waxed cloths for packing meat and raw eggs to keep longer, a technology later used in civilian food industries. Italian supply focused on the Mediterranean. A telling fact: Italian cooks carried not only food, but also mocha pots and pressure cookers to Africa, showing logistics joined to culture. Some submarines even tried growing herbs and lettuce in the hold. Seeds planted in soil boxes, watered daily in the dry warmth of the Mediterranean, but the plants withered quickly. Japanese logistics were complex due to geography. The Pacific is vast. Bases at Truk, Rabaul, and Palau faced U.S. attacks. Japanese Maru supply ships were under constant threat. Seaplanes were even used to deliver sacks of rice and drums of soy sauce to submarines. But these emergency airdrops were irregular and insufficient. Japanese crews had to rely on what they loaded at home, and later only on what remained in the boat's pantry. Progress in wartime food storage influenced civilian life. Deep freezing, dehydration, and vacuum packing advanced. U.S. studies tested freezer gear in extreme submarine humidity and vibration. German research yielded drying techniques for potatoes and fruit. The British invested in epoxy-lined tins to prevent corrosion. After the war, these innovations spread to households. Thus, this video shows not only the past, but also the legacy that shaped the food industry. The Americans could leverage an enormous industrial base. Ports like Pearl, Fremantle, or Medway functioned as staging and supply points. Carriers and supply ships moved food by the thousands of tons. Battleship Washington could load, in one replenishment, several thousand kilos of lemons, cucumbers, lettuce, ham, and flour. A network of refrigerated ships meant even submarines in the Pacific received fresh meat and vegetables. So-called tenders provided repairs, fuel, and food. Aboard them were bakeries, warehouses, and dairies. British and Italian crews depended on convoys and ports. Britons had to guard sea lanes against German U-boats, causing shortages. Italian supply ships ran the Mediterranean to North Africa, often hounded by British aircraft. Risky missions that sometimes ended with stores sunk and hunger at the front. Innovations appeared in preservation. Germans experimented with dried potato flakes and soy products. Americans introduced freezing techniques and emergency rations. On submarines, however, reliance on fresh sources persisted. Japan used hardtack and dried fish. The British carried colonial products like marmalade and tea. Closing this underwater cookbook, it's hard to avoid the thought that, at the end of all great strategies and technical innovations, there was always an ordinary person who needed food. We know German U-boat crews enjoyed a last piece of fresh bread and ham in a cramped mess before sinking into darkness. That Americans allowed themselves coffee and ice cream while sailing toward Tokyo. That a British crew fed a reindeer and dreamed of Sunday roast. That Italians ferried tons of pasta across the sea. And that the Japanese sacrificed comfort for torpedoes. This mosaic of tastes and stories shows how humanity adapted even under extreme conditions. Today's submarines boast nuclear power, air conditioning, and professional chefs. Food, however, remains the heart of the boat. Modern crews no longer suffer scurvy, yet still rejoice at fresh bread after weeks of freezer fare. In this video, you'll see that the tradition of food as psychological support has not changed. Commanders know a good galley is an investment in morale. When somewhere deep in the Atlantic today, the aroma of pizza or curry wafts through a sub, it's an echo of old times when sausage and coffee kept crews alive. If this story intrigued you and you'd like others to learn about it too, I'll be glad if you support the video with a like and a repost. In the depths of history and oceans, tastes remain to be discovered. Thank you for watching. I look forward to our next voyage together.